Russia is complaining that Ukraine is winning with drones, but Moscow has unleashed its new jet-powered Geran-5. Kharkiv again. My name is Jerome Starkey. I'm the defence editor at The Sun newspaper, and this is Frontline, your weekly roundup of the most important news from the war in Ukraine. We're starting with an extraordinary story reported by the Institute for the Study of War, citing a Russian military blogger revealing details of a conversation alleged to have taken place between Russia's defence minister Belousov and President Putin, in which Belousov was complaining that Ukraine has the upper hand in the drone war. That is extraordinary. He was complaining that Ukraine has more advanced drones, it has more of them, Russia is unable to deal with them, cannot detect them audibly, and that it has become a critical problem for Russia. According to the Institute of Study of War, Belousov used phrases like a new generation of equipment that is more sophisticated, it is persistent, and it is a real problem. Now, what is most surprising in that account is the reference to numerical superiority. Why? Because we know that throughout the war, Ukraine has been much faster at innovating. But what happens is Ukraine innovates, Russia copies, and then Russia scales much more quickly. That has been Russia's advantage. Now, it's always tempting to believe good news. We have to look, though, for any corroborating evidence, and I think perhaps there has been some. This year, we've seen Ukraine make small but tangible gains on the battlefield. We've heard this week from President Zelensky claiming that the Ukrainian positions on the front line are the best they've been in the last 10 months. And he cited Ukrainian, and slightly unusually, he cited British intelligence for that assessment. We've also, of course, seen those massive, spectacular drone attacks by Ukraine against Russia's Baltic ports, Ust-Luga and Primorsk, really threatening Russia's oil export opportunities through the Baltic. And clearly, those strikes have demonstrated that Ukraine has managed to find a way to get its long-range drones past Russia's air defences, either to defeat or evade those defences. The most recent evidence, just in the last week, we've seen a drone strike on a pumping station in Tinguta in Volgograd. That's some 325 miles inside Russian territory. Just today, details emerging of an explosion in Vladikavkaz. That's in North Ossetia, about 600 miles inside Russian territory. And we've also seen a lot of strikes closer to home. A fuel store in Feodosia in Crimea, ferries, the GUR, Ukraine's military intelligence unit, has hit ferries across the Kerch Strait, that's the connecting mainland Russian Kerch with the eastern tip of Crimea. Those ferries support traffic across the Kerch Bridge. We're going to come back to the importance of the Kerch Bridge and possible threats to it. And we've also seen air defense batteries and counter-battery radars destroyed in Zaporizhia, warehouses hit in Luhansk and Donetsk. Those are the occupied territories of Ukraine. We've also seen a year-old footage, so historic footage, but very dramatic and significant footage of a bridge over the Konka River, which is a tributary to the Dnipro, of this bridge being destroyed by a combination of heavy lift drones and missiles. This is significant because the Ukrainian troops behind it have claimed that this is the first time a bridge of that size has been destroyed with the help of drones. It was first reported in the Telegraph newspaper here in the UK. They claimed that there were 30 drone missions over 60 days which delivered 1.5 tons of explosives, including in the form of shaped charges. And these were with Malloy, British-supplied Malloy heavy lift drones that were originally developed in New Zealand for herding cattle that have been repurposed as combat weapons. Ukrainian forces saying that these drones delivered the shaped charges to vulnerable points on the bridge's structure after a Russian soldier posted a picture of himself near the bridge, and that picture revealed structural vulnerabilities of the bridge's structure. Bridges are notoriously difficult to destroy with aerial weapons. That's why many of you ask a lot, why hasn't Ukraine destroyed the Kerch Bridge? That is the lifeline for Crimea, a huge symbolic infrastructure project that was opened by President Putin linking mainland Russia to occupied Crimea. Ukraine has tried. It's tried with bombs on the road, it's tried with missiles, and it's tried with explosives underneath. What this operation on the bridge over the Konka shows in Kherson is that on a smaller bridge, with enough time, with enough explosives, with a combination of drones and missiles, it is possible. So after those 30 missions over 60 days, that was the drones dropping explosives, weakening the structure. The bridge was finally collapsed with a missile strike. Of course, much harder to do over the Kerch because the Kerch has significantly more air defenses. So it would be much, much harder. Ukraine, almost impossible to imagine a scenario where Ukraine would get 60 days of opportunity to hit the same part of the Kerch bridge. But nonetheless, dramatic footage, and it will give heart to those people asking why hasn't the Kerch bridge been destroyed yet. We've also seen Russia responding. Dramatic footage showing what appears to be a Geran-5 drone hitting Ukraine's energy infrastructure in Sumy. This is footage released by Russia because Ukraine does not typically release footage of strikes on its own infrastructure. The strike reportedly took place on April 4th. The footage just released a few days ago and heavily promoted by Russian accounts. Interestingly, this is a jet-powered drone that is much closer, or appears to be much closer, to a cruise missile than the Shahed-style drones that we've grown accustomed to. The Geran is the Russian name for the Shahed. So the Gerans have historically been Shaheds manufactured under license inside Russia. Russian military bloggers suggesting this weapon has a range of about 600 kilometers, can carry a payload of 60 kilograms and fly at up to 350 kilometers per hour. So that speed is comparable to some cruise missiles. Interestingly, this isn't the first time it's been used, we understand. Ukraine's GUR military intelligence, who I mentioned before, they said this weapon was first used in January this year. At the time, they said it can carry a 90-kilogram warhead and actually has a longer range of 1,000 kilometers. Worth paying attention to that because despite those complaints we were referencing earlier about the Russians are reportedly complaining about Ukraine's advantage, this is a reminder, an important, a salient reminder that Russia is evolving its technology quickly all the time, and then it scales it. So we expect a lot more of those Geran-5 attacks in the near future. In the close battle, we've seen those comments from President Zelensky suggesting the front line is the best it's been for 10 months. Ukrainian forces around Dobropilya reportedly making gains to the south and east, but around Konstantinivka, both sides slogging it out, both sides reporting some gains, some losses. Russia, over the course of the last 7 days, has launched a massive 1,600 missiles and drones at Ukraine. That is a big month by the standards of the war. Heavily loaded onto 2 days, onto the 3rd and 4th of April. On the 3rd, overnight into the 3rd of April, we saw 579 launched in a single night. On the 4th, 286, according to Ukraine's Air Force. On the political, diplomatic front, we've seen the leaders of Russia and Ukraine talking about a Easter ceasefire. That's for Orthodox Easter on April the 12th. Putin claims to have sort of unanimously declared that. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha has said they will wait and see. If the guns fall silent, then Ukraine will match that. There have been these sort of modest Easter ceasefires in the past, previously some under pressure, but clearly taken with huge amounts of caution if Russia is offering this ceasefire opportunity. A, whether it will be honoured, B, what other motives or nefarious objectives they may have behind it. We've also heard from President Zelensky that a planned visit by Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's peace envoys, is in doubt, and that's because the format and the schedule of trilateral peace negotiations is currently uncertain. Outside of Ukraine, I've today come from the London Defence Conference, where defence ministers, chiefs of defence staff from the Joint Expeditionary Force, that's 10 nations from Europe, have all gathered in London to look at and discuss the defence threats, and particularly readiness was the theme. Very interestingly, one of the most interesting people I heard from was Oleg Roginsky, the CEO of UForce, a Ukrainian arms company, where he said the most important thing about weapons is data. He said data is everything. And then when the Ukrainians are assessing the value of a weapon, They look at the cost per kill, and because these weapons all operate on a compatible software platforms, they can compare how many sorties a weapon can make, how long it lasts, how effective it is, how many kills it makes, whether that's kills of other weapon systems or soldiers. We heard all the usual guff from politicians about how important defence is, although I think we heard far less from them about what they're actually tangibly doing about it. In this country, a long-awaited defence investment plan, which is the blueprint for the future of the armed forces for the next 10 years, has not been published. It's not on the horizon. In America, President Trump has swung his weight behind Hungary's Viktor Orban, who's facing re-election over the weekend, and that follows a visit from Vice President J.D. Vance, which President Zelensky questioned the helpfulness of that visit. We also heard from President Zelensky this week about how he speaks to his mum almost every day, despite the pressures of being a war leader. That was in an interview with Alistair Campbell on their leading podcast. He said that Zelensky said if he misses a phone call from his mum, he will receive 10 or 20 in the course of a day, so he better answer the first. Zelensky's also confirmed on a slightly more serious note that Ukrainian drones and electronic warfare teams have successfully destroyed Iranian drones over the Gulf. Now, we reported that a couple of weeks ago, but Zelensky has confirmed it for the first time. And finally, one other story outside Ukraine has been that Britain's Defence Secretary John Healey said that 3 Russian submarines were detected and tracked lurking over vital subsea internet cables north of the United Kingdom in the North Atlantic, monitored by British, Norwegian vessels, spy planes and naval helicopters. Significant because 2 of these vessels, he said, were from GUGI, Russia's deep sea research unit. They have the capability to dive far deeper than any crewed British submarines and to sow sabotage devices, either explosive devices or perhaps cable cutting devices close to these vital cables. If you have any questions, please do ask them in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer as many as I can next time. 3 to get through today. Number 1, what would be the key vulnerabilities to Ukraine if it were to lose US weapons? Put very simply, I think it would be air defense. America supplies the most sophisticated and advanced air defense missiles, the Patriot. Most are supplied by America, but some are also supplied through European users of that American technology. Ukraine might also suffer if at the same time America turned off the intelligence feed, and that's about detecting Russian attacks, detecting Russian units. Those would be the greatest vulnerabilities. Question number 2. How would Russian soldiers react if the Kremlin war chest was empty? If I understand that question correctly, that's if Russian soldiers could not be paid? It's an excellent question. I was talking to a European general this week who was comparing the economic situation in Russia now to the 1980s. The strain that Moscow's under, he likened to the mid-1980s, where the outward signs of the strains were not really there. But by the late 80s, he was saying they really were much more visible. And then, of course, that led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Again, potentially wishful thinking. Short answer is most soldiers would probably stop fighting and try to go home. Most Russian soldiers, I would posit, although I can't be sure of this, are not ideologues. They are there for the money. This is a job for them. And if the government they were serving, if the leader they thought they were fighting for, if the idea they thought they were fighting for collapsed, then they would likely stop fighting. Final question. With Russia on the back foot, is now the time for the West to impose a no-fly zone over Western Ukraine? I think we need to challenge that assumption that Russia is on the back foot. Russian gains have slowed, the front line has stabilized, the Russians have complained about Ukrainian advantages, but I think it's too early to say that Russia is completely on the back foot. They are still slogging it out in this conflict. Nonetheless, the debate over whether or not the West should impose a no-fly zone remains live. Ukraine wants the West to help them close the skies right across Ukraine. We've also heard from Western politicians supportive of the idea of imposing a no-fly zone to create sort of safe haven areas. But it hasn't happened largely because it increases the risk of direct confrontation between NATO armed forces and Russian armed forces. Although I would suggest that shooting down missiles uncrewed missiles does not create that direct confrontation. Thank you very much for watching. If you've got any questions, please do ask them in the comments below and I will do my best to answer them next time. And of course, if you've watched this, if you're a fan of Frontline, please like, please subscribe, please share it with your friends. If you'd like to follow any more of my defence work more closely, then of course you can follow me on Twitter at Jerome Starkey.